Sitaram, good morning and welcome to another program in the series Addiction and Recovery. I'm your host, Ram Naresh Dwarika, and I will be taking you through a very important program this morning. This program is going to be recorded, of course, and posted on YouTube and Facebook at the end. And so, those of you who can't stay for the entire program this morning, of course, you can um, always come back and look at it later on. And the program will be repeated again tonight on radio and TV Jagriti at 10 p.m. So this morning, I am going to be talking about, I'm going to answer three critical questions that has come up so often in this whole question of drug addiction. And these are, why does addiction start in some people and not in others? Why does addiction start in some people and not in others? Two, what triggers the shift from use to addiction? How are you? How can you discern whether you are still using it recreationally or whether you have become addicted to it? And three, why does addiction continue even after devastating consequences? Even though a person might be intelligent, educated, very qualified, all of that, and is aware of what the role that alcohol and drug addiction is causing in their life, and yet they persist to continue to use. So to understand addiction fully, we must look at three categories of factors. There are what you call predisposing factors, that is, what makes a person vulnerable to drug addiction. And then there's, of course, precipitating factors, that is, what triggers the onset, what might have started it, to put a pin where this all turned from recreational to addictive, uncontrolled drug use. And then the third factor is perpetuating factors. What keeps addiction going? Why, in spite of what is happening, the person still continues to use, notwithstanding. So this framework is used in medicine, it's used in psychology and addiction science, and it helps to remove blame while increasing understanding. Because, there's a lot of stigma associated with alcoholism and drug addiction, and there's a lot of misconceptions about it. So hopefully, by the end of this program, some of these will be cleared up and some of these questions will be answered. And of course, if you have any question, anything that you did not understand, you can raise these questions in the YouTube channel that I will post. I have a YouTube channel there on Facebook, or you can call or text me on the numbers on your screen. So first, let us see about understanding addiction as a process. Now, addiction does not happen overnight. You don't go to sleep tonight a social drinker and then wake up tomorrow an alcoholic. It is a process, and it is not an event. Although you may have several events during the time of your drinking, but this takes time. So that most people who develop addiction, I can tell you this from working with alcoholics and drug addicts and being a person in recovery myself, most of the people who develop addiction, they did not plan to become addicted. Nobody started off wanting to end up. I've seen people end up homeless on the pavement, in the insane asylum, in a hospital with chronic illnesses now. And I am sure, I can tell you, none of them had intended when they started to ever be there. We always tell ourselves, no, that will not happen. I'm not so foolish. That will not happen with me. And then initially, people start using substances for relief, for pleasure, or for coping. And these would be the underlying factors that will eventually lead to chronic use. Then, thirdly, gradually, without realizing, a lot of people who might have started using it for relief, for pleasure, for coping, realize gradually they lose control as the brain chemistry and their behavior is changed. So understanding these factors, they help us to reduce stigma. We realize, we understand that, look, this person just wasn't doing this because they harden, as we say in Trinidad, or they deviant, or, you know, it is a gradual, they would have started just like everybody else. And as I say this, let me say at the start, not everybody who drink alcohol will become an alcoholic. But everybody who became an alcoholic, they started with that first drink. And that is why this is important to understand because, like I've said in previous programs, if you do not want to go in a certain direction, do not even look that way because a journey of 1,000 miles usually begins with that first step, that first drink. So that understanding these factors help us to reduce stigma. It also improves treatment outcomes in that we are able to develop a treatment plan considering all of these underlying factors. It will also improve the design for effective prevention strategies. So that because the more you know about a problem, the more competent you become able to fix it. So too for professionals who work in this field, it is critical that they do understand these issues, these underlying factors. So let's begin with the first one, the predisposing factors. That is the factors that make people vulnerable to becoming alcoholics because the predisposing factors are really the seeds of addiction. Predisposing factors are conditions that exist before drug use begins. They do not cause addiction by themselves, but they increase vulnerability and susceptibility. They so one of these predisposing factors is genetic and biological. There are genetic and biological factors that will predispose a person to alcoholism or drug addiction. And this is borne out by the research. Research shows that addiction has a strong genetic component. It also shows that children of addicts are at a higher risk of becoming addicted themselves. And these biological vulnerabilities include altered dopamine systems. Some people born with that altered dopamine. You know, dopamine is that drug in the brain that makes us feel happy. You know, it's a chemical. And some people born with lower altered dopamine systems that will predispose them. They have to take something now to feel as happy as they not normally will feel. Then there's some people who are it seems like they are born like that with a low stress tolerance level. They naturally become irritated very easily. And some people also have that genetic uh, impulsivity built into them, a high impulsivity where, you know, they tend to fly off the handle, they tend to be very impulsive, you know, just react instead of respond. And then there's that group of risk takers, sensation seeking personality traits, who want to go and jump from a plane and, you know, always testing the limits and so on and want to have to prove themselves to everybody else that, look, I could climb higher, I could run faster, I could do this, I could take these risks where you all are afraid. However, as I say this, it's as though genetics load the gun, but they do not pull the trigger. While it might make you predisposed, it may increase your vulnerability and susceptibility. It really does not cause you, per se, to start using drugs. Now, there are also predisposing psychological factors. Some of the common psychological vulnerabilities include depression. So there are people who become depressed, and because of other stressors, their job, their relationship, their status in life, for whatever reason, people become depressed. That is, they can't psychologically handle the challenges that they face even from childhood, the common entrance and the SEA and all of those things. And then on the other side of that continuum, there are people who suffer with anxiety or tend to be very anxious. And then there will be those who suffer trauma, abuse, childhood abuse, loss of a loved one, and I'll expand on that later on. But various sorts of trauma. And then there are those who generally suffer with low self-esteem because they're not as fair, good looking as they think they should be, or they have some handicap, or they have some restrictions, and as a result, they suffer with low self-esteem. And I have seen handsome and beautiful people who still think they're not good enough. And then there are those with poor emotional regulation. They do not handle emotional situations very well. They tend to be inappropriate sometimes. They tend to go into the dumps when they feel sad, or they're so elated that they lose track of being responsible. And then there are many individuals who use substances in order to escape emotional pain, because psychotropic drugs, mood altering substances, do exactly that. They change your mood. So when you in a bad mood emotionally, you're sad, you're depressed, you're bored, those people who might have been introduced to alcohol or drugs and realize that it can change their mood, and if it could work in some situation, why not in others? And that is how it leads to a lot of people starting now to self-medicate, to escape emotional pain. Take a drink, take a smoke. Some people use it to manage stress. And we are living in a very stressful world. Some people describe it as a rat race. We have to have the Joneses, better than the Joneses. We have to have a bigger car, bigger house, more money, more bling, as we say, and all of those things. So it leads to a very stressful life. And once you start using it, gradually, this for you to be normal, if you are stressed out most of the time, for you to be normal, you have to be on the drug all the time. So the drugs become a form of self-medication, and a lot of people, and the culture supports that, and we will talk about that in a little bit. Then, so there's biological factors that that predispose people to drug use. There are psychological factors, but there are also social factors that could predispose a person. So that family and developmental factors can also influence a person, influence their vulnerability, and predispose them to drug use. Family environments play a major role, especially where you have parental substance abuse. Where you have two parents using drugs. Alcohol, for instance, there's almost an 80% chance that the children can become alcoholics. Where there's one parent in the house, there's still a 60% chance that a child could become an alcoholic. But even if there are other people, like in my case, I had a grandfather who drank, and that may have influenced my own drinking. So parental substance abuse is one of those things that predisposes. Then there's inconsistent discipline. You know, one minute you're telling children, or you can't go and drink. But what the children are seeing every time relatives come, if you have to celebrate something, an occasion, birthdays, this and that, we celebrating with drink, we mourning with drink, we socializing with drink. So, I could remember, as a child, they tell you not to drink, but when the family comes, they'll send you to the shop to go and buy the drink and get a piece of ice as well. And this thing about do as I say and not as I do, that never worked. So inconsistent discipline can also lead to, you know, confusion as regards whether I should use, whether I should not use. Then there's emotional neglect or abuse, where, we tell children, you're stupid, you're this, you're that, you're ugly, you're hardened, you will not do well in life. It's self-fulfilling prophecy. It's called in psychology, where you literally create a situation where the children is emotionally and physically abused. And then there's the whole question of lack of supervision. And as I say that, even in the old days, mother and father with an in the days when we were involved in agriculture, everybody was home. We would all go to the garden together, little to big, or even when my parents went to the garden, my grandmother and my great grandfather and great grandmother would be home. So we were always supervision. And if Aja says, don't go in the road, you listen. That's your great grandfather, you know, because everybody listened to him. He was the head of the house. So that early exposure, what it does, it normalizes drug use and weakens protective boundaries, because not only alcohol I'm talking about here, children, they not they observe everything around them because their brain is like sponge. So they see when mommy goes into the medicine cabinet every evening for the sleeping pills, they see when daddy come and he has to take the nightcap. And mommy too sometimes have to have the glass of wine at dinner. And so children, that's normal. I mean, and they don't see anything wrong with that. That look, if you have a headache, you go and take a pill. And there's no medicine from the cradle to the grave, for pediatric this to geriatric that. So we have become a chemically dependent society. And some people are not only addicted and dependent on psychotropic drugs, a lot of people are becoming addicted and dependent on painkillers. There are medications that the doctors just tell you you'll have to take this for the rest of your life. And maybe I will talk about that one of these days, because there's an over dependence. And I'm not only blaming the doctors, the patients as well. It's a symbiotic relationship where they expect, doc, give me something because I want to feel good. And it's like, I want to feel good yesterday. I can't wait to feel good. So that early exposure normalizes drug use in families. Now, there's also social and environmental factors, and these include peer pressure. I could relate to that. I mean, I couldn't take a drink at home. I got one from my grandmother at Christmas once, but aside from that, when I and my friends go by the river, that's when somebody will come out with a cigarette that they stole from their father back, you know, and they will light it up, and all of us will have a pull. And then we were going to the creek one day, and one fella had a brown paper bag hidden up, and inside there was some strong rum, and he take it out, and they all had a sip, a drink, and pass it to me, and I couldn't say no, because I want to be a member of that group. I want to prove to them that I'm not less than them, although it blistered my throat. I couldn't swallow for the rest of the day. So peer pressure has a very, very potent um, effect on young people in terms of influencing them one way or the other, to the extent that so many sayings have derived from it. Show me your friends, I'll tell you who you are. Friends carry you, but they don't bring you back. And all of that has to do with the peer pressure. And then there's community norms. There's a saying that it takes a community to raise a child. And although you in the family, you're trying your best, you're talking to your children, you're protecting them from all of these things. But the village in which I grew up in South, there was most of the people went to work in the estate, cut cane, and in the crop time, you will see these men coming straight from the field in all their black clothes, and they're straight in the rum shop drinking. And that was the norm. I mean, everybody expected young children grew up being socialized into, look, the way to celebrate is to drink, the way to mourn is to drink, in the wake you have to have rum, at the wedding you have to have rum, everything. Christmas was rum, Easter was rum, and so on. So community norms also is a factor. Then poverty or instability, because it translates into a more difficult life. And we have seen entire groups of people, like the Irish, like the Indians, like the North American Indians, who became very, very susceptible because of poverty and social alienation and discrimination and all of that, where entire populations of people turn to psychotropic substances to help them to cope with their life situations. And I've written a paper and done a research on that, you know, to show why Indians were drinking so much rum in Trinidad and Tobago. Hopefully that will change with time. And then most of all is easy access to drugs. If you don't have it, you can't use it. But even then, that don't work, because we had the prohibition movement in the United States in the 1930s, where they banned alcohol. And even in the Middle Eastern countries, the Islamic countries, there's a ban on alcohol, but it does not translate into people not drinking. Human beings, we are like rats. No matter what you do, they're going to find a way to get the food. They will find a way. They have to dig underground and come. And so men did the same thing in the prohibition. They went underground, and you'll have what you call these speakeasies, where they start manufacturing their own moonshine, and in Trinidad we have a bush rum and all of that. And because addiction is a very, very potent driving force. When people become addicted, they demand the drug. And once that demand exists, some smart person is going to find a way to supply it and make money off it. So social context matters. Addiction does not occur in a vacuum, they say. There's a whole lot of, and I'm saying all of this, I want you all in the audience to bear in mind all the various components that that are acting in concert to support and to create this addiction. So as a result of that, we understand, it is just not the person saying no. What may have led them to that? And then we go to so far we looked at the predisposing factors: biological, psychological, family, and social, environmental. Now let us look at precipitating factors. That is, what was the tipping point? What was the trigger? Precipitating factors are events or conditions that trigger the onset of addiction. They mark the shift from casual use to problematic use. So up to that point, the person would have been using socially, casually, and so on. But nobody is able, I've spoken to hundreds and thousands of alcoholics and drug addicts in my career, and nobody seemed to know when they cross that imaginary borderline. Most people don't think they have crossed it as yet, when they crossed it a long time ago, or they may have been born with that predisposition. So very few people are able to really, it takes a great deal of honesty and awareness for a person to realize they have gone from controlled use to loss of control. Because the people around you will be telling you, all the time, hey, you're drinking too much, and sometimes they don't say it in a nice way. You say, when you see rum, you just can't leave, and that kind of thing. So, what might have triggered it? Common triggers include loss of a loved one. I know a lot of people, they lose, especially a spouse, and the society kind of accepts, boy, the man have the banker, he and his wife break up, and I could relate to that because I had the same experience. And so people have said, okay, give him a chance, let him take a drink, let him drink. So divorce or relationship breakdown could also lead to, because it leads to a certain amount of anger, and a lot of people, rather than translate their anger in outwardly, they turn it inward, and they use alcohol to help them to cope, as though they want to kill themselves, but they don't have the courage to do it in one go, so they do it gradually with alcohol and drugs. And then there's, of course, situations where people lose their job and they are unable to cope with that. And now the drinking also makes it worse because it doesn't, the little bit of money you had saved up as well to help you through this period, that and all is going to be frittered away. And then there's physical or sexual trauma, where, rape, some people raped and so on, and they do not have the adequate support system to help them to cope with it because they are unable to speak about it or talk to anyone about it. So they have this traumas. Then there are some people who might have gotten into accident now or got a stroke. We're seeing a lot of that. And from today, you were able to walk and do everything for yourself, and tomorrow you're completely handicapped and have to become dependent on other people. And the sudden change, a lot of people are unable to cope with that and adjust. And so they turn to substances, albeit it might be prescription pills. But here, when I'm saying substances, I don't only mean illicit drugs. I Because a lot of people in the world today are addicted to prescription pills. That's another thing we need to. I will do a program on prescription pill addiction. You know, so substances temporarily numb emotional pain, but by doing that, they reinforce the use. Because the person continue. And in this regard, not only mood altering substances do that, painkillers do that as well. So that another precipitating factor is the increased availability or potency. And I could relate to that when, as a young man with a schoolboy's allowance, and even though I might have had years to take a drink, I couldn't. And I had the supervision. I was living with my parents. But when I left home to work in Port of Spain and I moved from home to come to live in Central, I immediately I had no supervision. Nobody looked down on me and say, hey, don't do that. And then from a schoolboy allowance, I started to get a big man salary. I had the money, which translates to availability. And of course, I came to live in Felicity where there's no shortage of rum shops. Actual physical availability of the drug. So I found that you could drink and make friends very quickly, and that is what started me on that journey. And then there's the other question of changes in drug purity, where you might have been using a drug all the time, or you're drinking beers, but then you start moving to white rum, and then you move to punching, and then you move to punching steel and brass, punching rum and beer, or you move from marijuana to cocaine to all the others. I don't want to call it name. And even the drug, the potency changes people. Now I'm seeing people vaping a lot, and they're making the vape, you don't know what chemicals they're putting in it that is making it highly addictive. Then again, you'll find as you become more and more dependent, frequency of use increases. And then some people, the, the, the triggers could be the precipitating factor, which be now they move from taking a drink to injecting themselves. The route of administration makes it more and more potent. So these things increase tolerance because as you use drugs, you have to use more and more often to get the effect. It increases dependence as well, where you become less able to deal with the situation, whether you are using it to cope with your financial situation, your relationship, your stresses on the job, or whatever. You become more and more dependent on the drug to help you to do that, and then eventually you can't even do it. And then by extension, these all, when you can't get it, it increases the craving. It's called withdrawal symptoms. When, whatever goes up has to come down. And when it is coming down, when you take drugs and you feel good, there's a price to pay for that. When it is wearing away, you start having withdrawal symptoms. And some of the classic withdrawal symptoms are insomnia, irritability, that is, you have a short fuse, get vexed very quickly. Then you have hot and cold flashes, you have some people start trembling, shakes, you're getting shakes, and in some cases you have hallucinations, tactile and visual and auditory, you're hearing things there that not there, you're feeling things crawling on your skin, and you're actually seeing things that are not there. Those are all withdrawal symptoms. And eventually the brain adapts and because as these things happen, the brain tries to cope with it. And one of the ways to keep the brain from suffering the consequences of withdrawal, you come up with ways. This is when the person will have to even steal to support their habit, you know. And then there's psychiatric or medical changes. Now, new or worsening mental health symptoms like depression, anxiety, and PTSD, that is post-traumatic stress disorder, these are all that can now precipitate, cause you to start becoming dependent on drugs. And sometimes unwittingly, it is facilitated by people in the helping professions. So a lot of people start now becoming dependent on medical prescriptions, especially opioids or sedatives. And these can also precipitate addiction. You can become addicted to this. And I have had people coming to me who have become addicted, and they say, but the doctors say this is not addictive, you know. But addiction is not only physical addiction. You can become psychologically addicted. You can become chemically addicted as well. So sometimes I think some patients are not told the whole truth. And sometimes it is probably because the practitioner is never really worked in the field of psychiatry. General practitioners sometimes are prescribing psychotropic drugs that are highly addictive, which really is the realm of a psychiatrist. So maybe we need to talk about that in the future. And then another precipitating fact might be life transitions. We have stages of development. We have, especially a lot of people, and I'm seeing that, I've seen this in my practice all along, in my studies and research, that a lot of people start experimenting with drug out of curiosity and so on in the adolescence. Because at that time, there's a lot of stress. You know, in the developmental cycle of human development, in adolescence, there's a task called role identity or confusion, where the person is now deciding, what I'm going to do with my life. Just now, I have to take care of myself. I can't always be under the protection and support of my parents. I have to choose a career. And at the same time, all these hormones kicking up in both men and boys and girls, you know, where they start losing interest in their schoolwork and all of that. And they're not only curious about geography and history, they're curious about other things. They are being bombarded with the advertisement and the social media now, so that there's so much, and then you have exams to face. So many stressors at that time of life that a lot of people who might have started using it out of curiosity, especially upper and middle class families that have a bar in the house and who have a history of taking the nightcap and the wine and all of that, the children start going and helping themselves. And these will be the people, at the first sign of stress, goes to the psychiatrist, put on a prescription pill, a mood altering substance, a tranquilizer also. And the body does not discriminate whether this sedative or this anti-anxiolytic was prescribed by the psychiatrist or by the pharmacist or by the barman. The body just really is not concerned about the where it came from, the origin. It is more concerned with the effect it produces. And so a lot of people who are taking psychiatric drugs, they also, when the psychiatric drug is not delivering the results, they are now plastering themselves with alcohol and other illicit substances. And this, a lot of times, this is happening in adolescence, in college life. It also happens with people, I've seen it, people who are migrating. You know, all of a sudden, overnight, you took a flight and you wake up in a different culture the next day. No friends, no one all your recreational facilities are no longer there. And the easiest thing, and alcohol is cheap in a lot of these places in America and so on. So put two and two together, as we say, and you know what happens. If you visited the diaspora in Florida or in New York, wherever you find the Caribbean diaspora, you will definitely see barbecue going on and drinking, as though that's the only way for us to enjoy ourselves. Migration is one of them. And then retirement. A lot of people say, I was waiting. No, bedroom slippers come out. I'm staying in my in my pajamas all day. And I sit around in front of the TV, and now I could drink myself into oblivion. And then you really don't enjoy your retirement. In 2 or 3 years, you're gone. So without support and substances to fill the gap that is caused by these things, retirement and migration and so on, people turn to drugs. And then there's the perpetuating factors. Those are the biological, psychological, social precipitating factors. Let us look at the perpetuating. Perpetuating factors are forces that maintain addiction over time, in spite of whatever is happening. So they explain why people continue to use despite the consequences. The police charge you, you were brutalized, the magistrate threatened you that you will go to jail the next time. You paid $10,000. You got your permit suspended for 3 months, 6 months, whatever. You had to go report to the probation officer, and you were sent to AA. And you still go back on drinking. Why? You know why? Because the brain changes. There's what you call neuroadaptation. Repeated drug use actually rewires the reward circuits in the brain. It weakens impulse control and it heightens stress responses. People who use drugs, when they are coming off drugs, they're already stressed out because of the withdrawal. And when they have to deal with a stressful life that caused them to use it in the first place, it becomes several times more difficult. So you're on a merry-go-round, a chairplane, as you say, that the speed is increasing. You can't, when it was going slow, you didn't jump off. Now it is, with every use, it is going faster, and now you can't. To jump off, you could probably break your leg. So cravings become involuntary. You have no control over it, and choices become impaired because the front of your brain, your frontal lobe is affected now, and that center that make reasonable decisions and planning and all of that is affected by the drinking. And so this is why addiction is a chronic brain disorder. But they have no chemical that could fix it. That's the trouble. Putting back dopamine in there is substitution. You can't use drug to treat drug addiction. That is what I saw when I went to Ward 8 in Port of Spain. I worked there. I worked in St. Anne's Hospital. I saw that. I was at Cora. And thank God it was at Cora I discovered that you could use acupuncture to help people with the withdrawal symptoms. And you cannot get addicted to acupuncture. And this is why I have been, since 1992, practicing using acupuncture to help take people off not only alcohol and illicit drugs, but prescription pills as well. And I have quite a number of patients who work in the health fraternity because they have it available and they've been using it, including doctors. And because what happens as psychological dependence develops and a kind of conditioning that links with environmental cues, people, places, emotions become linked to drug use. So can't go to a party, can't dance when the taps are playing if I don't have a few drinking mad. You understand? So these things become your trigger over time. The block party and the carnival fets coming up, and next week, hopefully, I will do a program on some of the issues we need to look out for during the carnival season. So triggers activate cravings automatically. A fellow named Pavlov, he did a test with some dogs. He would give them food and then ring a bell. So they started to associate the ringing of the bell with food. And now he didn't give them food, he just ring the bell and they would start to salivate because they're expecting food. So too, triggers start developing, you start to develop a relationship in your mind. That once you go to the party or the Christmas party or the gathering or the wake, once you go to those places, it will bring the urge. And this is why we advise people in their recovery to stay away from slippery people, slippery places, and slippery situations, and to stay away from where drug is available. Because once you go, not only that, there are other triggers. There are people who first thing in the morning they want a cigarette, or if they have to go to the toilet, they have to have a cigarette. So they have different, or you get into an argument and you tell yourself, before I stay here and kill somebody, I'll go and take a drink. So there's a situation that triggers the use. Over time, it becomes a habit. So that a lot of people use it to numb emotional pain, to deal with shame and guilt. And I tell you, you produce a lot of shame and guilt when you're using drugs. So that, that it's like, one leads to the other and the other, it feeds into itself. Addiction creates broken relationships. It causes regret. It causes people to start feeling sorry for themselves. And ironically, these painful emotions drive further use. So it's like the chicken and the egg. You can't tell which one came before which. Substances become both the problem and also the solution. So I've heard people say, I live in to drink and I drink in to live. It's as bad as that. Because if you don't drink, you can't live. But once you're alive, you can't sustain yourself without taking that drink. And again, this leads to, and remember we're talking about perpetuating factors. That is factors that cause a person to continue to use in spite of what is happening with them. It leads to social isolation and stigma, of course. It also leads to a loss of trust. That's one of the big casualties in relationships when a person has become addicted, because now they have to lie. Where you went, John? I just went down the road. That time John reached Port of Spain, So what time you're coming? home 4 o'clock and you don't reach home until 2 in the morning. So that there's a lack of trust, reliability. And to the point where even the alcoholic themselves, the drug addict, can't trust that they can't make a decision and have any certainty that they will follow through with it. They lose trust in their own self, their own ability to deliver on what they have. So they secretly, and I did that for years, secretly, I'll never tell anybody, but secretly I will be trying to stop, secretly making, putting deadlines. I will not drink until this, my birthday, or until this. And to find the same day you make the promise, that's the same day you go and get drunk. So you lose confidence in yourself. And other people, of course, lose confidence in you. And then there's a withdrawal from healthy support systems and healthy activities, I would say. Because in my drinking days, I'm not going to PTA meeting or Bhagwat or church or those kinds of things. I have time with that. I will drop the family there to go. But yeah, River Lime, Fet Match. Now, in retrospect, I could see if I didn't have alcohol, I'm not there. And this is so for a lot of people. You start now only choosing friends who are alcoholic and drug addicts, and you're only going to activities where it is available. And this is why when a person this has serious implications for recovery. Because now when you stop, it's like you don't have a life. You're going to lose all your friends. You're not going to be able to go to all those places you used to go to. And that these are the things that causes people to relapse if they are not dealt with as quickly as possible in recovery. So that you find in chronic cases, a lot of people stop associating with others. They start isolation, and isolation strengthens addiction. I said this in a previous program as well. Connections weaken addiction, while isolation strengthens addiction. So that when you stop, you need to quickly find a support system, people around you who could help you and encourage you. And that is why AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, and Narcotics Anonymous, and all of these support groups are critical and effective because they fill that void immediately. Then another thing that perpetuates people drinking is a lack of structure and purpose. So that when you're drinking, Sunday could fall on Monday, as we say. There's no routine. There's no meaningful roles. You just existing. You wake up late and thereby some friend come and wake you up. Where are we going today, boy? Let me go by the beach. We're making a cook down the road. So there's no routine. You understand? You don't get up and do any. You don't know what you're going to be doing in the morning. There's no meaningful roles. You're not taking on any responsibility for anyone or anything, and even for yourself. And over time, you don't set goals because, like they say in Jamaica, you lose your stick-to-itiveness. How many things you would have started and abandoned in the past. So the brain seeks stimulation all the time, and drugs provide it. That's the only thing. So that recovery requires rebuilding structure and meaning. Now, these have implications for treatment and recovery because effective treatment must address predisposing vulnerabilities, precipitating triggers, and perpetuating mechanisms. This is why detox alone fails. A lot of people believe if you just stop drinking, the problem is solved, or you stop vaping or whatever, everything will be all right because the problem started when you started to drink. But no, that don't work. Detox alone will fail. Short-term solutions usually lead to relapse. Long-term recovery requires ongoing support, and that support especially from people who know about this business. So you need to go to people, counselors who understand addiction, and you need to go, even church and temple and so on will help to some extent, but were not designed to deal with addiction per se. So you need to go to Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous. So treatment must be biological in that you must have a proper medical evaluation at the beginning of treatment. It must also look at the psychological dependencies, the low self-esteem and the poor coping skills. It also need to attend to your social environment, your family, where you live. If you're living in a high-risk environment, if your family, there are people in the family who are also using drugs or generating stress that cause you to continue to use and so on. It is important that the family understand their role now in your treatment. And this is why family sessions are critical. And then there's also a spiritual component. All human beings, we are bio, psycho, social, spiritual beings. And any treatment plan that does not look at all those four areas is doomed to failure even before it starts. So, in conclusion, we want to, addiction is not about bad choices. It is about complex interacting forces. Predisposing factors explain vulnerability, precipitating factors explain onset, and perpetuating factors explain persistence. So when we understand addiction this way, we reduce shame, we improve compassion, and we design better recovery systems. Most importantly, we restore hope in the person. So that addiction may be powerful, but recovery is stronger when the right supports are in place. I want to thank you all for listening. And to again remind you, this program is going to be posted on YouTube and Facebook in a few minutes. It will also be repeated on radio and TV Jagriti tonight at 10 p.m. And those of you who might have questions, you can raise it. You can call me at 671-3040 or text me at 768-5925. And I would be happy to respond to those. I want to thank the staff at Radio and TV Jagriti, especially Mr. Vijay Maharaj, who I recently spoke with concerning our convention that is coming up, that will be hosted at Vishnu Boys, and I want to thank him in advance, and the Mahasabha board for allowing the use of their schools for the purposes of AA meetings all over Trinidad and Tobago, for allowing the Vishnu Boys High School and several other of their facilities for AA activities free of charge, and for also hosting this program since its inception as a public service to all our brothers and sisters in Trinidad and Tobago and worldwide, and also for posting it on social media as well. So I want to thank you all until next week, Thursday. Have a safe and sober weekend. And next week, we'll be talking about some of the issues relating to Carnival. So stay tuned. Thank you again.